Hi, English 3 or English 8. Welcome back to the next checkpoint. And what we're going to talk about now is really the plot of the story. So we're going to walk through just some of the more popular elements of the plot. Now, we already talked about characters, and I will hit on that for a little bit. But for the most part, what I wanted to do is I wanted today to cover a little bit more about the plot, the theme, the characters, the setting, and the conflict. Now, we talked about the setting and the characters the other day, so really what we're going to zone in on is the plot and the conflict, all right? So when we talk about plot, what are we talking about? Plot is basically concerned with the organization of the main events that happen in a work of fiction, right? So most of the plots that we trace, they have some kind of change going on. And typically they're caught up in some type of conflict that is usually resolved. Now, the most famous plot diagram that we have is called Fintags. All right. Now, this starts with exposition, and I'll go through each of these. Then we have what they call rising action, and that rising action leads to climax, and then that climax then leads to falling action, or domontin. And then finally we have resolution. So if we talk about the exposition, really what we're talking about is this is the beginning of the story. Here the characters are first introduced to us and we get to know them a little bit, all right? So if you think about Harry Potter, that exposition would be the introduction to Harry, and when he was told that he had to go live, when he was forced to live with his uncle and his aunt, and they were really bad to him. So it kind of gave background information about that. Now, once we get into the rising action, which is the next part, that is probably most likely when Hagrid shows up and takes him away, and he starts school at Hogwarts, right? So then we have, all these things of people that he meets and new things that he learns. And then we have the showdown with Quirrell. So, each part of this kind of runs into each other. Now, when we talk about exposition, just to kind of go back, it's important to have the setting, which is your time and your place. And it's also important to have the protagonist, the main hero. The antagonist is someone who is in conflict with that. So typically, they are the bad guys. Now, we have two types of characters that come up. The first one is often called a static characters. Static characters don't necessarily change excuse me, throughout the story. A good example in Harry Potter would probably be Hagrid. Hagrid is the same as he was in the beginning and the end. So in that case, he was a good static character, where you might have a bad static character, which is someone who remains bad the entire time and doesn't change, who might be Malfoy, although Malfoy does have a character arc and later on becomes good in the very, very end. So maybe the Sirius Black's cousin, Lucretia Black, right? Next, we have what we call point of view. And the point of view is who is telling the story. So the first one is called first person. First person is when a story is told through the main character's eyes. The story is told, again, using that first personal pronoun, such as I, me, we, or you, or us. All right? So it describes that action as that happens. So that can either be in present tense or that can be in past tense. Right? So past tense would be something like, this is when I realized that Edward Cullen was a vampire and I was madly in love. Right? So in that case, it's already happened and they're telling that in the past tense. The next would be third person. And third person is when it's told from an outside character. So the narrator of the story is not a character in the story. All right? Instead, they describe events that happen to other people. Present tense, they describe them as they happened, using pronouns like he, she, they, and them. So it might be something like Katniss turned to see Peeta standing right beside her. Or you could have third person past tense, so it already happened. Now, the two additional that I want to talk about are third-person limited and third-person omniscient. So a third-person limited is when the narrator is not a character in a story and talks about the other characters, and they only have a limited perspective of one of the characters' minds, feelings, or motives. Not everybody, but just one, and that's called limited. So the next one would be third-person omniscient, where the character knows everything. All right, they know what all of the they know all the feelings and the motives and the thoughts of everyone. All right, so this is kind of just a brief introduction, and when we come back in a little bit, we're going to talk about rising action. So, all right, thanks.